It was really by the script, what we could expect. This was the Hong Kong and Macau Affairs Office, based in Beijing. And it's rare that they actually hold press conferences. And the fact that they're doing so for the second time in as many weeks already is sending a strong signal that they consider what's happening in Hong Kong serious enough that they want to make very clear, even in the name of reiterating the message twice in 2 weeks. The message is uncompromising. There is no recognition that any of these protesters might have legitimate grievances and demands. They were asked by reporters about the actual concerns of many of the protesters out on the street. But like I said, when it's by the narrative, the narrative in the official Chinese press and the Communist Party line narrative has basically been that these protesters are not genuinely there because they are actually aggrieved by what they see as Chinese encroachment of their liberties, of their freedoms, but rather they're there because they're being manipulated by outsiders, by behind-the-scenes masterminds, as the officials put it this morning, who are driving them out there. And they're being led by a small fringe of radical and violent elements that are also driving what these officials refer to as misguided but well-intentioned citizens. So zero recognition that there could be true democratic aspirations among any of these hundreds of thousands of protesters who have been taking to the streets for the past 2 months, 9 weeks now, to basically air their grievances. On the other hand, thinly veiled and not so thinly veiled warnings from these officials. Do not misjudge. Do not mistake. We heard it in that quote before. Do not mistake our restraint as a sign of weakness. Now, they were asked by one reporter, what about those Chinese troops and the People's Liberation Army, the Chinese army troops that are garrisoned on Hong Kong Island? They've been there for the decades now since the handover, and they don't come out of that garrison. It's basically been mostly a symbolic force. Could they be sent in? Would they be used? Would China resort to them? That was one of the questions put to them. And as we heard, no explicit, we're going to send in those troops. But as we also heard, we will defend, meaning China will defend every part of its territory. So once again, that implicit and not so implicit threat that those troops are there, and if push comes to shove and China's leaders do not act to restore order, as they put it, and restore order and get the police and everyone back in line and those protesters off the streets, anything can happen. So the official slogan, Claire, is one country, two systems. But unofficially, it may as well be one country, one system coming out of this press conference.
You mentioned that issue of Chinese troops. It was mentioned at the first press conference of its kind as well, because really that's something weighing heavily on protesters' minds.
This is the giant issue. Hong Kong's leaders, and Carrie Lam, the chief executive of Hong Kong, has so far made it clear that she does not intend to ask China to send in its troops. She doesn't want to have to resort to that. And as of now, China probably doesn't want to use that as the first resort. Why? Because the image of troops in Hong Kong, its jewel financial hub, would probably scare investors away and severely damage the image of Hong Kong and provoke a real outcry in the international community. Something that China would like to avoid. It doesn't mean it's not going to use those troops. We saw last week a very slick propaganda video released by the Chinese army showing soldiers basically saying, one through a megaphone, all consequences are at your own risk. It was showing basically soldiers engaging in anti-riot exercises in Hong Kong. So an implicit threat, this video showing water cannons, tanks, rocket launchers, a very violent video in many ways, saying this is what could happen, the implicit message. This is what could happen if you continue on this radical protest route, as the Chinese authorities see it. So for now, that army still garrisoned, but seen as a real and present danger, and most people on the streets of Hong Kong are not excluding the possibility that China could resort to more force, which is why they're trying to keep that critical momentum going and getting more and more people in society out onto the streets continually until they feel like they had been heard by the Chinese authorities, which we didn't get a sign of today.